Congratulations! You've just woken up in Moscow, 1978, and you're an American spy operating under diplomatic cover. The good news: you're about to experience one of the most legendary chapters of Cold War history firsthand. The bad news: your chances of completing even a single operation without being arrested, imprisoned, or worse, have dropped to nearly zero. The moment you open your eyes in your apartment on the diplomatic compound, you realize something fundamental has changed. You're being watched, not metaphorically, literally, constantly, by professionals who've spent decades perfecting the art of surveillance. Before you even throw back the covers, you need to understand what you're facing. Outside your bedroom window, somewhere in the gray Moscow morning, members of the KGB's 7th Chief Directorate are already at their posts. They've been watching since before you woke. They know what time you usually rise. They've studied your patterns for weeks. Any deviation from your normal routine will trigger additional surveillance, more watchers, closer scrutiny. The apartment you're sleeping in isn't yours, not really. It belongs to the Soviet state, assigned to you as part of the diplomatic housing complex. Every room is monitored. Hidden microphones are embedded in the walls, installed during construction by workers who reported directly to the KGB. Miniature cameras are concealed in light fixtures, watching from angles you'd never suspect. Even the telephone on your nightstand is tapped, has been since the moment it was installed, recording every word you speak. You drag yourself from bed, and immediately you must remember, you're performing. Every movement, every gesture, every expression on your face is being recorded, analyzed, catalogued by intelligence officers in some windowless room across the city. They're looking for tells, for signs that you're more than the low-level State Department employee your diplomatic credentials claim you are. They're watching for the moment you slip, the instant you forget to maintain your cover. The first challenge hits you as you stand barefoot on the cold floor. You need to check your shoes, not for comfort, but for bugs, listening devices small enough to fit inside a heel, planted overnight by KGB teams who possess keys to every lock in this building. These soft entry specialists can pick any door in Moscow without leaving a trace. While you slept, they may have been here, moving through your apartment like ghosts, examining your belongings, photographing documents, installing surveillance equipment in places you'll never think to check. Finding a bug in your shoe isn't paranoia. It's Tuesday. As you move through your morning routine, the psychological weight begins to settle. You cannot speak freely, not even to yourself. Muttering while you make coffee could reveal operational details. Talking in your sleep last night might have compromised everything. The KGB's transcriptionists are listening to hours of recordings right now, searching for any slip, any phrase that doesn't fit your cover story. You've been trained for this. At the farm, the CIA's training facility in Virginia, they prepared you for Moscow operations. They warned you it would be difficult, but no amount of training can fully prepare you for the suffocating reality of total surveillance. The morning light filtering through your curtains is gray, perpetually overcast, matching the drab Soviet architecture visible from your window. Moscow in the late 1970s is a city of concrete and suspicion, where Brezhnev's regime maintains an iron grip on every aspect of life. This is the height of the Cold War, when nuclear missiles point at cities on both sides, when proxy wars rage across the globe, when one miscalculation could trigger Armageddon. The intelligence you're here to gather could prevent that catastrophe, or your capture could accelerate it. You're tuned to the Velvet Obscura. Tonight, we open another case. If you're finding these stories help you drift off, I'd really appreciate a quick like or subscribe. It helps more than you know. And I'm always curious where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment with your location. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're exploring why you wouldn't survive even a single day as an American spy in the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The smell of instant coffee fills your kitchen as you prepare breakfast, acutely aware that even this mundane act is being monitored. The KGB knows what you eat, when you eat it, how long you spend in each room of your apartment. They've built a detailed profile of your daily life, looking for patterns they can exploit or anomalies that reveal your true purpose. You eat quickly, mechanically, barely tasting the food. Your mind is already running through today's operation, the elaborate plan you've spent weeks preparing. You need to meet with your asset, a Soviet engineer who's volunteered to pass classified information to the CIA. His name is Dmitry, though you only know him by his code name, Compass. He works at a defense research facility, designing radar systems for Soviet fighter aircraft. The intelligence he's provided has been invaluable, giving Western analysts crucial insights into Soviet military capabilities. But meeting Compass is extraordinarily dangerous. For him, it means potential execution if caught. For you, it means arrest, interrogation, expulsion if you're lucky, decades in a Soviet prison if you're not. For the operation itself, it means risking the entire Moscow station's ability to function. One blown meeting could compromise other assets, other operations, could shut down American intelligence gathering in the USSR for years. Before heading to the embassy, you must complete your morning routine exactly as you have for the past 6 weeks. Any variation will alert your watchers that something is different about today, that today matters. You shower at the same time, dress in the same order, check your watch at the same moments. The KGB has timed everything you do. They know you spend 7 minutes in the shower, 3 minutes shaving, 12 minutes getting dressed. Deviation by even a minute will appear in their daily report, will trigger questions, will increase surveillance. As you dress, you select clothing carefully. You'll need to execute a disguise on the run later today, transforming your appearance in seconds while moving through a crowd. The raincoat you're putting on will be removed during the operation. The businessman's briefcase you're carrying contains workers' clothes underneath false compartments. Your polished shoes can be swapped for worn boots you've hidden in a pre-positioned dead drop. In 3 seconds, you can transform from American diplomat to Soviet laborer. But only if the KGB gives you those 3 seconds. You step outside your apartment building, and immediately, the surveillance begins in earnest. The cold Moscow air hits your face as you walk toward your car, a standard diplomatic vehicle that's been thoroughly compromised. The KGB has installed tracking devices, listening equipment, even removed and examined every component before reassembling it. They know this car better than you do. As you approach, you spot them. 3 vehicles parked at strategic points around the compound. Engines, idling, drivers ready. These are your tails for the day. Rotating surveillance teams that will follow you from the moment you leave until you return tonight. They'll use a dozen cars throughout the day, switching vehicles every few miles to avoid detection. But you'll always be followed. Always. Behind the cars, on foot, more watchers. A woman waiting at the bus stop who never boards a bus. A man reading a newspaper who never turns the page. The street vendor whose cart always seems to be on your route. All of them are KGB. All of them trained to blend into the urban landscape while maintaining visual contact with their target. The 7th Chief Directorate employs thousands of officers for surveillance operations. On any given day, as many as 20 vehicles and 40 personnel might be assigned to follow a single suspected CIA officer. You drive slowly, carefully, obeying every traffic law with painful precision. Running a red light would trigger an immediate response, marshalling additional surveillance teams, bringing more scrutiny to your movements. Driving the wrong way down a one-way street, even accidentally, would be noted in your file, discussed at KGB briefings, possibly used as pretext for your expulsion. The Moscow rules are clear on this. Never give them a reason to escalate. Every action must be mundane, predictable, boring. The moment you become interesting is the moment you've failed. The drive to the embassy takes 20 minutes, and you're followed every second. The KGB vehicles maintain careful distances, rotating positions, communicating via radio in coded language. They know where you're going. You go there every day. But they watch anyway, because the one time you deviate, the one morning you don't go to the embassy, that's the morning you're meeting an asset, running an operation, doing the work that justifies all this surveillance. The U.S. Embassy compound finally appears, a fortified collection of buildings surrounded by walls and guards. This is nominally American soil, the one place in Moscow where you're safe from immediate KGB interference. But even here, security is compromised. The embassy building itself is thoroughly bugged, honeycombed with Soviet listening devices installed during construction in the 1950s. The Soviets built sections of the structure, providing workers and materials, embedding surveillance equipment in the concrete and steel. There's even a carved wooden replica of the Great Seal of the United States, a gift of friendship presented to the U.S. ambassador in 1945 that hung in his office for 7 years. It contained a sophisticated passive listening device, powered by microwave radiation from a nearby Soviet transmitter, requiring no batteries or wires. The KGB listened to private conversations in the ambassador's office for 7 years before the bug was discovered in 1952. Inside the embassy, you make your way to the 7th floor, where the CIA station operates behind reinforced doors and armed guards. But even here, you cannot speak freely. Not until you enter the bubble, a transparent plastic structure that looks like an oversized telephone booth suspended from the ceiling to prevent vibration-based listening devices from picking up conversations. This claustrophobic space, officially called a secure compartmented information facility, is the only place in all of Moscow where American intelligence officers can discuss sensitive operations without being overheard. Everything you know refers to it by a more informal name, borrowed from the TV show Get Smart, the cone of silence. You step into the bubble with your station chief, a career CIA officer named Hathaway, who's been running operations in Moscow for 3 years. The plastic walls press close, the air inside stale and warm. Hathaway looks exhausted. Everyone at Moscow Station looks exhausted. Operating in the most denied area in the world, where every operation risks lives and every mistake can shut down intelligence gathering for months, takes a psychological toll that's impossible to describe to anyone who hasn't experienced it. "We need to finalize tonight's operation," Hathaway says, his voice barely above a whisper despite the secure environment. Even in the bubble, paranoia is rational. Compass is getting nervous. His last message indicated increased security at his facility. He thinks counterintelligence is investigating someone in his department. This is the nightmare scenario. If Soviet counterintelligence is conducting an investigation at Compass's workplace, meeting him now could lead them straight to him. But canceling the meeting means losing crucial intelligence about Soviet air defense systems, intelligence that NATO desperately needs. The decision weighs on you like a physical burden. We proceed, Hathaway decides, but we use the full protocol. Gap creation, disguise on the run, the entire procedure. If there's any indication of enhanced surveillance, you abort immediately. Compass's life depends on your judgment out there. You nod, feeling the weight of that responsibility settle into your chest. A man's life depends on your ability to detect surveillance, to create a 3-second gap in KGB coverage, to execute a perfect dead drop without being observed. The pressure is immense. Hathaway pulls out a map of Moscow, marked with operational details visible only in this secure room. The gap will occur here, he points to an intersection in northwest Moscow, at approximately 1800 hours. Your wife will be with you, carrying the birthday cake. When the driver makes the turn, you'll have 3 seconds to exit the vehicle while she deploys the jack-in-the-box. The dummy will occupy your seat until you return to the car here. He indicates another location 3 blocks away, approximately 8 minutes later. The jack-in-the-box is a sophisticated piece of tradecraft, a spring-loaded dummy that pops up to fill your seat the instant you exit the vehicle, creating the illusion that you're still in the car for surveillance teams following behind. It's saved operations before, but it requires perfect timing. If the KGB team is too close, if the driver's turn isn't sharp enough, if any element fails, you'll be caught in the act. And catching a CIA officer in the middle of an intelligence operation provides the Soviets with enormous propaganda value. You spend the next hour reviewing every detail, memorizing routes, timing, backup plans. If anything goes wrong, if you're caught or compromised, you have instructions for destroying evidence, protocols for protecting other assets, procedures for minimizing damage. But there's one thing that can't be minimized: Compass himself. If you're caught servicing his dead drop, the KGB will stake it out, waiting for him to check it. They'll arrest him the moment he touches the dead drop site, and then he'll disappear into Lubyanka prison, the KGB headquarters where interrogations are conducted and confessions are extracted. He'll be tried in secret, convicted of treason, and executed by firing squad, all because you made a mistake. The morning passes in nervous preparation. You review your cover story, the elaborate legend that explains your presence in Moscow as a minor State Department employee processing visa applications. You've memorized every detail of this false biography, can recite the names of your supposed colleagues in Washington, can describe the apartment you supposedly lived in before Moscow, can discuss the bureaucratic procedures you supposedly handle at the embassy. This legend is your shield, the story that protects you if you're ever interrogated. The KGB will test it, looking for inconsistencies, searching for the moment your story breaks down. As afternoon approaches, you leave the bubble and return to mundane diplomatic work, maintaining your cover by actually processing visa applications and handling routine correspondence. This is the reality of intelligence work: 99% waiting and paperwork, 1% action. But that 1% can change history or cost lives. At 16:30 hours, you leave the embassy with your wife, who's been briefed on her role in tonight's operation. She's nervous, but hiding it well. The KGB knows you're married, knows your wife's name and background, has a file on her as thick as yours. They don't know she's been trained to assist in operations, that she's practiced the jack-in-the-box deployment dozens of times, that she's as committed to this mission as you are. As far as the KGB knows, she's just a diplomat's wife, along for the ride. You drive through Moscow as evening descends, the city's lights beginning to flicker on in the gathering dusk. Your surveillance team is immediately apparent, 3 vehicles maintaining careful spacing behind you, rotating positions every few minutes. They've followed this same route before, when you've attended diplomatic functions or visited other embassy personnel. Nothing about tonight appears different to them. Not yet. Your wife sits beside you, a large birthday cake in a decorative box on her lap. According to the cover story you've carefully constructed, you're attending a birthday party for a colleague at his apartment. You've even made phone calls from your bugged apartment, discussing the party, confirming attendance. The KGB has heard these conversations, has the party on their schedule, considers it routine. This is the art of deception, making the operational appear mundane, hiding your real purpose beneath layers of normal activity. The driver, a CIA officer with years of Moscow experience, maintains perfect composure as he navigates the streets. He's driven this route 3 times in rehearsal, has timed every turn, knows exactly where the critical moment will occur. In the back seat, you can feel your heart hammering against your ribs. Your mouth is dry. Your hands are steady only through force of will. In 5 minutes, everything will depend on split-second timing and a little bit of luck. The intersection approaches. You can see it 2 blocks ahead, a sharp right turn that will briefly take your car out of sight of the surveillance team following behind. The driver accelerates slightly, just enough to increase the gap between your car and the nearest tail vehicle. Not so much that it appears intentional, just normal traffic flow. 1 block away now. Your hand moves to the door handle. Your wife's hand moves to the spring release on the jack in the box. The driver's hand tightens on the wheel. The turn happens fast. The car swings right, tires squealing slightly on the cold pavement. For 3 seconds, you're out of sight of the KGB surveillance team. 3 seconds. It's all you get. You throw open the door and roll out of the moving vehicle, hitting the pavement hard, already moving toward the shadows between buildings. Behind you, you hear the soft pop of the jack in the box deploying, the dummy rising to fill your seat, wearing a hat that matches yours, visible enough to fool observers in following vehicles. You're up and running, adrenaline flooding your system, heart racing. You tear off the raincoat as you move, revealing the worker's clothing underneath. The briefcase is left behind in a pre-arranged drop point. In 15 seconds, you've transformed from American diplomat to Soviet laborer, just another worker heading home after a long shift. You force yourself to slow down, to walk normally. Running attracts attention. Any American caught running through Moscow streets would be stopped immediately, questioned, detained. The dead drop site is 3 blocks away, in a small park that's largely deserted at this hour. Compass has chosen it carefully, visible enough that his presence there wouldn't be suspicious, secluded enough that surveillance is difficult. You approach from the west, eyes scanning for watchers, for anyone who seems out of place. The KGB could have discovered the site, could be waiting in ambush. Every operation carries this risk. The park is quiet. Too quiet? You can't tell. Paranoia and caution are impossible to distinguish when operating in Moscow. You spot the dead drop location, a hollowed-out piece of fiberglass disguised as a chunk of masonry, positioned at the base of a monument. It looks like debris, like something a maintenance crew overlooked. No casual observer would give it a second glance. You approach the monument as if you're just passing through, a worker taking a shortcut home. Your hand moves naturally, casually, retrieving the dead drop container in a single smooth motion. It's heavier than you expected. Compass has delivered something substantial this time. You slip it into your coat pocket without breaking stride, continuing through the park toward the other side. Now comes the chalk mark. This is Compass's signal that the drop has been serviced, that the intelligence has been retrieved. Without this signal, he'll return to check the drop again tomorrow, and every day he returns increases the risk of surveillance detecting the pattern. You walk past a specific lamppost on the edge of the park, and as you pass, your hand makes a single stroke with white chalk, drawing a barely visible horizontal line at waist height. To anyone watching, it would look like you steadied yourself against the post. But Compass will know what it means. The intelligence is safe. Stay away from this location. Wait for the next scheduled contact. The return journey is even more dangerous than the approach. You've been out of the car for 6 minutes. The KGB surveillance team will have realized by now that something is wrong, that the figure in the back seat hasn't moved, hasn't shifted position. They may already be checking, may already know you've given them the slip. Every second that passes increases the likelihood of discovery. You navigate through back streets, moving quickly but not frantically, heading toward the pickup location where your car will meet you. The worker's clothes and confident stride allow you to blend into the evening foot traffic, just another Soviet citizen in a city of millions. But the packet in your pocket feels like it weighs 100 pounds, like everyone you pass must know you're carrying stolen secrets, must be able to see the guilt written across your face. 2 blocks from the pickup point, you spot them. 2 men in dark coats, moving purposefully in your direction, eyes scanning the crowd. KGB. They're searching for you, trying to figure out where you went, how you disappeared. You turn down a side street, maintaining your casual pace despite every instinct screaming at you to run. Running would confirm their suspicions, would mark you as a target. You blend into a group of workers leaving a factory, becoming just another face in the crowd. The pickup location is a service alley behind a grocery store. Your car is there, engine running, door slightly ajar. You approach from the shadows, scanning for surveillance. Nothing. You slip into the back seat, and your wife immediately hands you your raincoat and hat. In 10 seconds, you've reversed the transformation, becoming the American diplomat once again. The jack-in-the-box is already packed away. To anyone watching, you've been in this car the entire time. The driver pulls smoothly back into traffic, heading toward the supposed birthday party location. You'll actually attend the party now, maintaining your cover, spending 2 hours making small talk with embassy personnel while the intelligence packet burns a hole in your pocket. Only after the party ends, after you've returned to the embassy and entered the secure station, will you finally examine what Compass has given you. But first, you must endure those 2 hours of performance, of pretending nothing unusual has happened, of celebrating a colleague's birthday while knowing you've just risked your life and Compass's life for intelligence that might prevent nuclear war or might get you both killed. The psychological toll is immediate and severe. Your hands shake slightly as you hold a glass of wine. Your smile feels artificial, plastered on. But everyone around you is diplomatic personnel, trained to maintain composure, and nobody mentions that you look like you've just run a marathon. Later, back at the embassy, inside the secure station, you finally open the packet Compass has delivered. It contains film, dozens of frames of classified documents photographed using the miniature camera the CIA provided him. The documents detail Soviet radar systems for the MiG-29 fighter aircraft, technical specifications that Western intelligence has been desperate to obtain. This intelligence is worth billions, will allow NATO to develop countermeasures, will save lives if war ever comes. But as you look at the intelligence, all you can think about is Compass. He risked everything to obtain these documents. He smuggled the camera into his secure facility, photographed classified materials under constant risk of discovery, hid the film for weeks until this dead drop could be serviced. He did it because he believes the Cold War might go hot, that nuclear weapons might be used, that someone needs to prevent catastrophe. He's not a traitor to his country in his own mind. He's trying to save it from its leader's recklessness. And now, you've accepted his intelligence, making him dependent on the CIA for continued safe contact, for exfiltration if he's ever compromised, for protection that you may not be able to provide. The moral weight of this relationship settles on you like a stone. You've become responsible for this man's life, and the odds of keeping him safe in Moscow are terrifyingly low. The days that follow the operation are almost worse than the operation itself. You wait for signs that Compass has been arrested, that the dead drop was surveilled, that your gap creation was detected. Every morning, you check the prearranged signal sites where Compass would leave a chalk mark if he's in danger. Every morning, you find nothing, which could mean he's safe, or could mean he's already been arrested before he could leave a signal. Meanwhile, your normal life continues under constant surveillance. The KGB watches you leave for work, watches you return home, watches you shop for groceries, and attend diplomatic functions. They watch because watching is what they do, because in the surveillance state of the Soviet Union, watching foreigners is normal, expected, necessary. The 7th Chief Directorate employs thousands for this purpose, has cars and apartments and entire office buildings dedicated to monitoring the few hundred American diplomats in Moscow. You develop a relationship with your surveillance team in a strange way. You recognize the faces now, can identify individual officers by their patterns and vehicles. There's the older man who always drives the blue Volga, who follows with professional competence but without imagination. There's the younger woman who sometimes tails on foot, who's better at blending into crowds than her colleagues. They know you too, have files filled with details about your habits and preferences. In a perverse way, they know you better than most of your friends back home. This is the reality of Moscow operations that no training can prepare you for. The grinding psychological pressure of constant surveillance, the isolation of being unable to speak freely, even in your own apartment, the weight of responsibility for assets whose lives depend on your tradecraft. Officers who serve in Moscow during the Cold War experience burnout rates far higher than any other posting. Marriages crumble under the pressure. Some officers request early transfer, unable to handle the stress. A few have nervous breakdowns, the paranoia becoming too much to bear. But you endure because the work matters. The intelligence compass provides helps Western analysts understand Soviet military capabilities, helps NATO plan defenses, helps prevent miscalculations that could lead to war. Every successful dead drop, every piece of intelligence safely delivered to Washington, represents a small victory against the vast Soviet security apparatus. Small victories are all you get in Moscow. You celebrate them privately, in the bubble, in the few moments when you can let your guard down. Weeks pass. Compass continues to operate, continues to deliver intelligence, continues to risk his life. You service dead drops every 3 weeks, each operation as dangerous as the first, each requiring the same elaborate gap creation and disguise work. Some operations go smoothly, others nearly result in detection. Your car chased through Moscow streets by KGB teams who've realized something is wrong, forcing desperate evasion maneuvers and aborted meetings. Then comes the message that changes everything. It's 1985 now, 7 years into your Moscow posting. You've successfully run Compass for all those years, have delivered intelligence worth hundreds of millions to Western analysts. But in Washington, something has gone wrong. Aldrich Ames, a CIA officer responsible for Soviet counterintelligence, has begun selling information to the KGB. He's motivated by debt, by greed, by the simple fact that the Soviets pay him far more than the CIA does. Over the course of several months in 1985, Ames reveals the identities of virtually every Soviet citizen working as an asset for American intelligence. Compass is on that list. You don't know it yet, but his name has already been passed to the KGB. They know he's been photographing classified documents. They know about the dead drops. They're watching him now, building a case, waiting for the right moment to make their arrest. They want to catch him in the act, want to present proof at trial, want to use his capture as propaganda, showing the reach of Soviet counterintelligence. The first indication something is wrong comes when Compass misses a scheduled signal. You check the designated location where he's supposed to leave a chalk mark indicating he's ready for the next dead drop. Nothing. You check again the following day. Still nothing. This could mean many things. He might be under enhanced surveillance and unable to visit the signal site safely. His work schedule might have changed. He might have decided the risk is too great and withdrawn from contact. Or he might have been arrested. You report the missed signals to Hathaway in the bubble. His face goes gray as you describe the situation. "We've had other assets go silent this month," he says quietly. 3 in the last 2 weeks. Headquarters thinks we might have a leak. A leak. The word hangs in the stale air of the bubble like a death sentence. If there's a mole in the CIA, if someone is revealing agent identities to the Soviets, then everyone you've worked with over the past 7 years is in danger. Compass and all the others, every Soviet citizen who's risked everything to help the West. The order comes down from headquarters: suspend all operations, service no dead drops, make no approaches, wait until the leak is identified and plugged. It's the only rational decision, but it feels like abandonment. Compass is out there somewhere, and if he's been arrested, he's facing interrogation in Lubyanka prison. He'll be tried in secret. The verdict is already decided. The sentence is death. Weeks later, you learn the truth through intercepted Soviet communications. Compass was arrested 3 weeks ago, walking into his office at the defense facility. KGB counterintelligence officers were waiting for him, had evidence of his photography work, knew about the camera you'd provided. They interrogated him for days, seeking names of other CIA assets, locations of other dead drops. According to the intercepts, he revealed nothing. He protected you, protected the other assets he might have known about, endured interrogation knowing it would end with his execution. He was tried in a closed military court on charges of treason. The trial lasted 1 day. He was convicted and sentenced to death by firing squad. The sentence was carried out 2 days later in the basement of Lubyanka prison. He was 43 years old. He left behind a wife and 2 children who will spend the rest of their lives under surveillance, suspected of complicity in his treason. You learn these details sitting in the bubble, reading the intercepted communications, and something breaks inside you. This man risked everything to prevent nuclear war, to help both sides understand each other, to reduce tensions that could have destroyed civilization. And he paid with his life. His family will suffer for his choices. His name will never be publicly known, will never appear in history books, will be classified for decades after his death. The guilt is overwhelming. You recruited him. You trained him. You provided the camera and established the dead drop protocols. And when he needed exfiltration, when the walls were closing in, you couldn't get him out because Aldrich Ames had betrayed him first. You followed every protocol, executed every operation perfectly, did everything right. And it wasn't enough. Compass isn't the only asset lost in 1985. As Ames continues to sell information, the casualties mount. Adolf Tolkachev, an engineer at a Soviet aviation design bureau who'd provided intelligence worth billions, is arrested and executed. Sergei Motorin, a KGB officer working for the CIA, is arrested and executed. Valery Martinov, another KGB officer providing intelligence, is arrested and executed. The list grows longer, each name representing a person who believed in preventing war, who took enormous risks, who paid with their lives. The Moscow station essentially shuts down. With the leak unidentified, running any operation risks more lives. You spend your days processing visa applications, maintaining your diplomatic cover, going through the motions while knowing that your real work has ended. The KGB surveillance continues. They still watch you leave for work, still follow your car, still tap your phones. But now it feels almost mocking. They know you're not running operations anymore. They know you've been compromised. They're watching just to remind you they can. In 1994, Aldrich Ames is finally arrested. FBI counterintelligence officers have spent years building a case, tracking his finances, monitoring his communications with his KGB handlers. The evidence is overwhelming. He's convicted of espionage and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. His wife, who assisted in his spying activities, receives a shorter sentence in exchange for his cooperation in debriefings. But the damage is permanent. The agents he betrayed are dead. The intelligence they provided is tainted, suspect, because the KGB knew about them and could have been feeding disinformation through them. The Moscow station's operations are disrupted for years. American intelligence gathering in the Soviet Union is set back by a decade, all because one CIA officer decided money was more important than the lives of the people he was supposed to protect. As you drift off tonight, let yourself imagine what it took to operate as an intelligence officer in the most denied area in the world. The constant surveillance, the suffocating paranoia, the moral weight of recruiting people whose lives depended on your tradecraft. The Moscow rules that officers memorized: assume nothing, never go against your gut. Everyone is potentially under opposition control. You are never completely alone. Weren't just guidelines. They were the distilled wisdom of decades of operations, written in the blood of assets who'd been caught and killed. Consider the technology war that raged in the shadows. The Thing, that carved wooden seal containing a passive listening device, was just the beginning. By the 1970s, the KGB had planted bugs throughout the new U.S. Embassy building during construction, embedding them in concrete and steel, creating a structure so thoroughly compromised it could never be fully secured. The Americans discovered microphones in typewriters, recording devices in walls, antennas hidden in chimneys designed to intercept low-power transmissions from devices planted elsewhere in the building. The CIA fought back with its own technology. Miniature cameras could reduce a full page of text to a microdot the size of a period, small enough to be hidden in plain sight. Encrypted one-way radio broadcasts allowed communication with agents inside the Soviet Union without face-to-face meetings. Dead drops used everything from hollowed-out tree branches to fake dog excrement to hide intelligence materials. There was even Acoustic Kitty, a bizarre CIA program that surgically implanted listening devices into a live cat, hoping to use it for surveillance. The cat was released near a Soviet compound for its first mission and was immediately hit by a taxi. The program was cancelled. But all the technology in the world couldn't protect assets when there was a mole inside the CIA. All the tradecraft and training became meaningless when someone with access to classified files decided to sell agent identities to the enemy. The human factor remained the weakness in any intelligence operation. Trust could be weaponized. Loyalty could be bought. And the consequences were measured in lives lost. Think about the Soviet citizens who volunteered to help Western intelligence, knowing the risks, proceeding anyway because they believed in something larger than themselves. Adolf Tolkachev, who provided intelligence on Soviet radar and avionics systems because he wanted to prevent war and saw Soviet leadership as reckless with nuclear weapons. Dmitry Polyakov, a GRU colonel who spied for the CIA for 25 years because he was disgusted by Soviet corruption. Oleg Gordievsky, a KGB officer who provided intelligence to British MI6 because he believed in democratic values over totalitarian control. These weren't traitors motivated by money or revenge. They were patriots who loved their country but opposed their government, who saw the Cold War spiraling toward potential catastrophe and decided to do something about it. They risked everything: their lives, their families, their reputations. Most of them were eventually caught and executed. Their names remained classified for decades. Their stories were never told. They died in secret, in basement cells beneath Lubyanka prison, shot by firing squads in the middle of the night. The psychological toll on the CIA officers who ran these operations was immense. They recruited people, built relationships with them, promised protection they couldn't always deliver. When assets were arrested, when operations failed, the guilt was crushing. Some officers never fully recovered, carried the weight of those deaths for the rest of their lives. The Moscow rules included, never assume you're not being watched, but there should have been another rule. Never forget that the people you recruit might die because of your mistakes. The irony of the Cold War espionage world was that both sides were doing essentially the same thing, recruiting each other's citizens, running operations in denied territory, building surveillance capabilities. The KGB recruited American intelligence officers just as the CIA recruited Soviet officers. Aldrich Ames wasn't unique. Robert Hansen, an FBI agent, also sold intelligence to the Soviets during this same period, causing even more damage. The Walker spy ring, a family of Navy personnel selling cryptographic secrets, compromised American submarine operations for years. On the Soviet side, officers like Gordievsky and Polyakov provided intelligence to the West while maintaining their official positions. It was a wilderness of mirrors, as one CIA counterintelligence chief called it, where loyalty was uncertain, where anyone could be working for the other side, where trust became impossible. The paranoia this created within intelligence agencies was corrosive. In the 1960s, CIA counterintelligence chief James Angleton conducted a mole hunt that destroyed the careers of dozens of innocent officers, paralyzed operations aimed at the Soviet Union, created an atmosphere of suspicion that lasted for years. He saw moles everywhere because moles were everywhere. The trick was distinguishing real threats from imaginary ones. And what of the families, the wives who assisted in operations, who deployed Jack-in-the-Box dummies, who maintained cover stories under pressure? The children who grew up in Moscow compounds, surrounded by surveillance, unable to play freely without KGB watchers noting their movements. The marriages that crumbled under the stress of constant lies and performance. Intelligence work demands sacrifices not just from officers, but from everyone around them. By the mid-1980s, the Cold War was beginning its final phase, though nobody knew it at the time. Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union in 1985, the same year Aldrich Ames betrayed so many agents. Gorbachev introduced glasnost and perestroika, policies of openness and restructuring that would ultimately lead to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. The surveillance state that had made Moscow operations so difficult began to loosen, though slowly, grudgingly, fighting against decades of ingrained paranoia. When the Soviet Union finally collapsed, when the KGB was dissolved and reformed into the FSB, many secrets came to light. Some American intelligence officers learned the fates of assets they'd lost contact with years before. Most had been arrested and executed, just as feared. A few had managed to survive, had withdrawn from contact and lived quietly, never revealing their cooperation with Western intelligence. These survivors lived with constant fear that their past might be discovered, that old files might be reviewed, that revenge might come decades after the Cold War ended. The Moscow rules survived the end of the Cold War. They're still taught to intelligence officers today, applicable to any denied area where surveillance is total and mistakes are fatal. The rules evolved, adapted to new technologies and changing geopolitical realities, but the core principles remained. Assume you're being watched. Vary your routines. Trust your instincts. Protect your assets above all else. Looking back from the present day, the Cold War seems almost quaint. Two superpowers facing off with nuclear weapons, playing chess with human lives, engaging in elaborate spy games that risked global annihilation. But for the people who lived through it, who operated in Moscow during the height of tensions, there was nothing quaint about it. Every operation was life or death. Every decision had consequences measured in blood and broken lives. The courage required to operate in that environment is difficult to comprehend. To walk through Moscow streets knowing that dozens of trained surveillance officers are watching your every move. To recruit assets knowing you might not be able to protect them. To execute operations knowing that one mistake means arrest, interrogation, imprisonment. To maintain cover stories under constant pressure, never able to speak freely, always performing, always on guard. And yet, they did it. American intelligence officers served in Moscow despite the risks. Soviet citizens volunteered to help despite knowing the likely outcome. Both sides produced people willing to risk everything for what they believed in, whether that was defending democracy or preventing nuclear war or simply trying to survive in a world gone mad with suspicion. As the night deepens and you drift towards sleep, remember the names of those who didn't survive. Adolf Tolkachev, executed for providing intelligence on Soviet radar systems. Sergei Motorin, executed for working with the CIA while serving in the KGB. Valery Martynov, executed for the same reason. Dmitry Polyakov, executed after 25 years of providing intelligence to prevent war. And countless others whose names remain classified, whose stories will never be told, who died in secret because they tried to make the world safer. Remember, too, the CIA officers who recruited them, who promised protection, who carried the guilt of their deaths. Marty Peterson, the first female CIA operative assigned to Moscow, who was caught by the KGB during a dead drop operation in 1977, but survived to tell her story. Tony Mendez, who developed the disguise and escape techniques that saved lives. Jonah Mendez, who refined those techniques and helped exfiltrate Oleg Gordievsky from the Soviet Union in 1985. These officers risked their careers and their lives operating in the most dangerous city in the intelligence world. The Moscow rules ended with this wisdom. Once is an accident, twice is coincidence, 3 times is an enemy action. In the world of Cold War espionage, paranoia was rational. Suspicion kept you alive. Trust could get you killed. The constant psychological pressure of operating in that environment left scars that never fully healed. But the work mattered. The intelligence gathered in Moscow helped prevent miscalculations. The relationships built across enemy lines between CIA officers and KGB defectors sometimes produced understanding that prevented escalation. The human connections, fragile and dangerous as they were, reminded both sides that the enemy was human too, had families and fears and hopes for a future without war. The Cold War ended not with nuclear holocaust, but with peaceful revolution, with the collapse of the Soviet system under its own contradictions. The intelligence gathered by brave men and women on both sides played a role in that outcome, provided leaders with information they needed to make decisions, reduced uncertainty in a world where uncertainty could trigger catastrophe. So, as you finally drift off, exhausted by the journey through this dangerous history, Let yourself imagine living in that world. Waking up in a Moscow apartment you know is bugged. Walking streets where every face might belong to a surveillance officer. Running operations where mistakes mean death. Carrying the weight of responsibility for assets whose lives depend on your tradecraft. Living with constant fear, constant pressure, constant performance. Could you have survived it? Could you have maintained perfect discipline under total surveillance? Could you have recruited people knowing you might not be able to save them if things went wrong? Could you have executed dead drops and gap creations and disguise changes while surveillance teams followed your every move? The answer for most people is no. The psychological pressure would break them, the fear would paralyze them, the responsibility would crush them. The CIA officers who served in Moscow during the Cold War were exceptional, not because they were stronger or smarter than everyone else, but because they found ways to function in an environment that should have been impossible to operate in. They followed the Moscow rules. They protected their assets as best they could. They gathered intelligence that helped prevent war. Some of them paid with their careers, their marriages, their mental health. Others carried guilt for the rest of their lives, unable to forget the faces of the people they couldn't save. But they did the work. They served in the most denied area in the world. They operated in Moscow when the Cold War was at its coldest, when nuclear missiles pointed at cities on both sides, when one miscalculation could have ended civilization. The darkness is complete now, and the silence is profound. The story of Cold War espionage in Moscow is over. The principals dead or retired. The secrets slowly being declassified and revealed. The embassy buildings that were honeycombed with bugs have been replaced or renovated. The surveillance techniques have evolved with technology. The Moscow rules have been updated for a new century. But the fundamental reality remains. Some places in the world are denied areas where surveillance is total, where operating means accepting risks that would seem insane in any other context. Intelligence officers still serve in these places, still recruit assets, still risk their lives gathering information that might prevent war. And some of those assets still get caught. Some still pay with their lives. Some still die in secret, their names never known, their sacrifices never acknowledged. The wilderness of mirrors continues, the spy game goes on, the human cost accumulates. Rest now. Let the weight of this history settle into the darkness. Let yourself appreciate the ordinary freedoms you possess, the ability to speak freely in your own home, to move through the world without constant surveillance, to trust that the people around you are who they claim to be. These freedoms were defended, in part, by the people whose story you've heard tonight. Sleep well. You've survived a day in Cold War Moscow, if only in imagination. The real CIA officers who did it for years deserve our admiration, our gratitude, and our remembrance. As do the assets they recruited, the brave men and women who risked everything to prevent catastrophe, who died in secret so that the rest of us might live in peace. The Moscow rules remain. Assume nothing. Everyone is potentially under opposition control. You are never completely alone. But tonight, in the safety of your own home, you can set those rules aside. Tonight, you are free to sleep without fear, without surveillance, without the crushing weight of secrets that could get people killed. Tonight, you are free. And that freedom, hard-won through decades of Cold War struggle, is worth remembering.